Well, I think Joe Biden voted for Donald Trump. I don't think he voted for Kamala Harris. I think that he couldn't be happier after that loss because that was such a backstabbing move that the Democrats made.
Jimmy Carter's funeral brought together all sorts of former presidents, the upcoming president, and Michelle Obama was conspicuously absent. There were reports that she didn't want to sit next to Donald Trump. Can you talk about some of these images coming out of the funeral?
It was interesting to see President Obama and President Trump sitting side by side and having a jovial conversation because for months the Democrats said that Donald Trump was literally Hitler, and that simply was not the case, and they knew it was not the case. And now that they're forced to sit beside one another, they are cordial. They're having an interaction. It's two former presidents talking with one another. One's about to go back into office. And frankly, I think it's the kind of debate or discussion that we need to have at a moment like this, especially at Jimmy Carter's funeral. I just can't help but think about how the Democrats tried to pound that false narrative into our heads for months on end, saying that Donald Trump was the greatest threat to democracy that ever existed, saying that it reminded them of the Nazi regime, some of the things he was saying and doing, and that they would never be seen in the same room with him. And now that he has won, now that the American people have spoken and said that that narrative is false, they're sitting beside each other having a normal conversation.
So we have literally Hitler laughing with Barack Obama, and Kamala Harris didn't seem too happy about that.
That's true. Kamala Harris seems to be in the third or fourth stage of grief over her loss, and I guess that's to be expected. But that narrative did not hold up. I think that Obama probably knew it would not hold up, and I don't think that he believed she ran a very good campaign. There was like a hot mic moment a few months ago where somebody was reading lips of them talking to Joe Biden, and Obama was casting doubts on Kamala Harris's candidacy. That was not the way to conduct a nomination for the Democrats, and everybody who had been around Democrat politics for a long time knew it. Joe Biden was in a very weak position. He did not have the opportunity to go back in because the Democrats pushed him out. He would have lost anyway, but Kamala Harris rushed in and did everything incorrectly. They called it a perfect campaign, but what they actually did was to completely astroturf her rallies. They supplied pop stars to these events that would draw in crowds and didn't focus on making sure that all those people turned out to vote. There was an enormous amount of disappointment in the way that the finances were handled. They shelled out millions and millions of dollars and were millions of dollars in debt when it was all said and done. They shelled out things like $5,000 to get her nails done before a particular event. I mean, that's not what the donors put their money towards. They thought that she could skate in on pop support, but she didn't skate in whatsoever.
It also looked like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were not on very good terms, or at least in this setting they were quite frosty. What do you think of their relationship?
Well, I think Joe Biden voted for Donald Trump. I don't think he voted for Kamala Harris. I think that he couldn't be happier after that loss because that was such a backstabbing move that the Democrats made. It was a combination of Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Hollywood essentially staging a coup within the Democrat Party. And I think Joe Biden could care less whether or not Kamala Harris ascended to the presidency. If she won, then he could say that it was because of his track record in the past administration, which from an objective standpoint was abysmal, but he'd still claim it. And if she lost like she did, then he could kind of chuckle and say, well, maybe if I'd have stayed in, I would have won. So to show that she lost after essentially going around the normal standards of having people cast ballots in a Democrat primary was something that I think probably sustained him in the last few days of the election. I doubt they're on good terms right now. They weren't on good terms before they even ran together on the same ticket. You had Kamala Harris attacking Joe Biden over issues related to, I believe it was busing, and calling him out on the debate stage and accusing him of things, and Joe Biden just stood there and took it. I don't think they ever had a very strong relationship. I think they tried to make this strategic, but she had such abysmal poll numbers in the Democrat primary. The first time around, she got a whopping 3% of her party's nominations whenever they were casting their ballots. So she was never enormously popular in the Democrat Party, and she wasn't able to pull it off this past time either.
And what about this absence of Michelle Obama? Is that conspicuous?
I think it's a little interesting that she didn't show up, especially because Kamala Harris had to hold her nose and show up. Barack Obama had to show up. I don't think that it was the right move if there was no other great excuse apart from she had to sit beside Donald Trump, because others showed up and did it. I mean, you even saw Donald Trump shaking hands with Mike Pence at this event. If Donald Trump can shake hands with Mike Pence, somebody who he is enormously frustrated with, Michelle Obama can show up for the sake of the country and maybe for the sake of civility.
What do you think of Jimmy Carter as a president? I know this is a big moment for America whenever a president dies. What do you make of this moment, the funeral, but also his legacy?
It's interesting to give a perspective on a president that I never lived under. It's interesting to look back and hear different perspectives. I think Donald Trump framed it pretty well, that he was a good man but a bad president. I believe that was related to the terminology that he used. I've heard many people say that we honor the office regardless of what we think of the individual. There are many folks down in Georgia who say that he wasn't such a nice guy, that his policies contributed to a period of time that allowed for Republicans to come in and take over because it was such abysmal that they compared it to Joe Biden and said that the only person who was happy about Joe Biden's presidency was Jimmy Carter because he came out with a very bad economy. So I think that we honor the office. I think we honor the man who was in this position. But I think we can also learn from the lessons of history. I called what Joe Biden was experiencing in this past campaign before he dropped out the Jimmy Carter trifecta, where you had sky-high inflation, you had an overseas hostage crisis, and you also had very bad energy prices here at home, a domestic oil production issue, and a domestic energy crisis. Those were three things that heavily contributed to Jimmy Carter's loss, would have contributed to Joe Biden's loss had he stayed in the race, and I think ultimately when they tied the Biden and Harris name together and said this is their administration, it's what ultimately led to Kamala Harris's downfall.
We're coming very close to the inauguration now, just less than a couple of weeks away. How do you assess the transition period so far? There's been a bit of infighting between different factions of the MAGA campaign, Elon Musk, H-1B visas, all of this stuff. What do you make of the transition period? Is Trump going into the inauguration stronger than he was on November 5th?
I think so. I think that having a conversation about different policies is healthy for our party. I wouldn't accept the premise that we're divided as a party. I would say that we get to have a national conversation about a host of different issues. And I would point to evidence of showing how there was a speaker battle that was brewing right before this past week, and yet Donald Trump was able to step in and unify his party with just a simple phone call. Some of the holdouts were convinced that this would not look good for the Republican Party and it would be disrespectful to the incoming president and the country at large if they had another long, drawn-out fight like they did with Kevin McCarthy the first time. So Donald Trump has been able to unify this party, and even if there's particular issues that maybe different factions of the Republican Party have differences on, we get to have a conversation about that and debate that. It's not like we're having a full-out clash or anything. It's just a discussion that we get to have as a party to figure out where we go next.
And what do you think his first 100 days look like?
If I could wave my magic wand and say that the incoming Congress would be able to execute on Trump's agenda, I would say three things need to happen. We need to get single subject bills. I understand that President Trump wants to combine a lot of things right at the very beginning, and we can try that. But we also need to get Congress on a healthy pattern of saying this is what we're voting on, up or down, instead of deceiving the American people with omnibus packages and we don't know what's passed in it. And this is not unheard of. Idaho has this in their state constitution. It says that the text of the bill must match the title. The second thing is to get our immigration under control. That means building the wall. It means getting the deportations underway. And it also means making sure that the people who are in line to legally immigrate to the United States are not circumnavigated by these illegal immigrants who are coming in mainly on the backs of the cartel who are profiting off of the United States of America. And lastly, I would say that we have to get a balanced budget in order. The last time that Congress fulfilled its most fundamental fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers and balanced the budget was 2001. I was 5 years old. There are people who have graduated college who have never seen the U.S. Congress actually fulfill that responsibility. So let's get those three things done. I know that heavily involves Congress, but that's why Donald Trump is heavily involved in having conversations with the Republican Congress to make sure that we actually get things done instead of just waiting around and messing up this opportunity because it's a very short window of time. He'll do his executive orders on day one, but in order to have a large reaching impact that goes far beyond any presidency, we need Congress to act.
As Joe Biden leaves the presidency, can you just assess his legacy and also his relationship with President Trump?
You know, I don't know what President Biden's relationship with Trump is going to be reflected upon over the next few years. I don't know if they'll repair it, but I think that largely we will view this as an inconsequential presidency. I don't believe that Americans are going to look back on this presidency and say this is what we were able to accomplish under Donald Trump. We had major things like getting the Abraham Accords accomplished, getting inflation down to essentially nothing. It was like 1%, I think. Under Joe Biden, we had sky-high inflation. We had overseas crises. We had a abysmal Afghanistan withdrawal where service members were killed overseas. We had Russia pouring into Ukraine, Hamas pouring into Israel. It was a time of instability. I think largely Joe Biden's legacy is just going to be the sandwich in between Donald Trump's two presidencies.
Thank you for watching this video. If you want to watch more, content, please subscribe to our new GBN America YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.